Our guests are here now, so welcome everyone. My name is Marion Danzeisen from the German American Center in Stuttgart, and I'm your host this evening. And before we start, I would like to welcome and thank all of our cooperation partners who helped put this event together. Above all, the US General Consulate in Frankfurt, and especially our new colleague there, Annie Bünke, for organizing and bringing all of this together. But I would also like to thank the US Department of State and the American Film Showcase for their generous support. And finally, all of our dear colleagues at the Carl Zeiss Planetarium Stuttgart, the Atlantische Akademie Rheinland-Pfalz, as well as the German American Institutes in Heidelberg, Saarland, and Tübingen. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and for helping advertise this event. So we hope that most of you had a chance to watch the film Madame Mars on Eventive right before this panel. And for those of you who didn't, we will now try to show a very short clip so you can get some impressions of today's topic.
Is no longer earthbound. Man. 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 Man.
I think it's a great adventure, probably the greatest adventure of mankind, at least in our century.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
That's one small step for man.
Man. Man. Man.
When I saw Neil Armstrong step foot on the moon, I said, wow, that's the potential of humanity, right? And us as a human race.
Hot summer night, July 1969. I'm out playing hide and go seek. Then I hear this voice calling me out of the wilderness.
Clear, how's it going?
I come in, grainy image of this human walking on the moon.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully.
And I can't believe what I'm seeing.
There seems to be no difficulty in moving around.
All that mattered was that one day I wanted to see my footprint on the moon.
Let me say this, we made a study in NASA while the Apollo program was still alive on how we would send a man to Mars with modern technology.
How about living?
Well, I tell you, woman's lib will see to it that...
My first thoughts about Mars were in 1997, when I saw the pictures of the first Mars rover, the Sojourner rover, on the Dutch TV. For some reason that I cannot explain, I wanted to go to Mars.
Did you know about the female connection there? Did you know who Sojourner Truth was? Did you know about Donna Shirley, who designed the first rover?
No, I did not. This is news for me now.
All right. So in case you want to watch the whole film, you still have a chance to do so for the next 7 days, as long as you registered on our homepage. And I think we're going to share the link with you a little later as well again. So let me briefly just guide you through our event. We are going to start with welcoming remarks by US General Consul Patricia Lacina, and afterwards we will briefly introduce our female panel and then dive right into the discussion. So at the end, as always, you at home will have the chance to ask questions, and please do so via the Q&A button. And as always, the chat function will be disabled throughout the entire event. So without any further ado, Consul General Lacina, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Marion Danzeisen, for your kind introduction. And thank you to Das Stuttgart for hosting this event on behalf of all 12 GAIs throughout Germany as part of this year's Women's History Month. Thank you also to the American Film Showcase, a program administered by the USC School of Cinematic Arts and supported by the Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, making this virtual event possible. Especially during this pandemic, cultural programs developed by the AFS and the German American Institutes remain a central pillar of public democracy, and I continue to be amazed by the innovative ways these partners manage to bring us together virtually to discuss virtually anything. I really enjoyed the documentary. And I look forward to listening to an interesting conversation led by Anna Green, Jan Millsapps, and Dr. Suzanna Randall. It will be great to learn more about past and future initiatives leading the way in empowering girls and young women to pursue their dreams of not only becoming astronauts, but of pursuing careers in STEM more broadly. It is March, and March is Women's History Month, when we celebrate the role of women in our society and their achievements. I'm a woman in a leadership position, and this was only possible because there have been women who have paved the way for me. Personally, the topic of women's empowerment is near and dear to my heart. Women everywhere are making a difference in their communities, in their professions, and opening up a world of possibilities for young girls. Having worked around the world, I know how essential that is and how challenging. But I'm convinced that diversity in a team is the key to the success of any mission. Without women, NASA would not have made it to the moon. One special woman was Katherine Johnson, a NASA mathematician who sadly died last year. Her calculations were essential to the success of Apollo 11, ensuring that the mission would be able to land on the moon and then safely return to Earth. Katherine Johnson is only one proud example of the many accomplishments of women at NASA. Just recently, we watched Swati Mohan as she controlled and operated the rover Perseverance on its successful mission to Mars. But we still have a long way to go. Women make up a mere 20 to 22% of those working on space projects, and this percentage has not significantly changed in the past 30 years. Over 560 people have traveled to space, but only 11% are women. And women are still an overwhelming minority in many university engineering programs. We must continue to raise our voice, work to improve these percentages, to encourage young women to start a career in STEM, and to make sure we regard that as merely the beginning of our efforts rather than the end. I might add that the job is also not yet done within the US Foreign Service. We too have further to go in putting more emphasis on diversity within the workforce and leadership team. We are actively addressing this shortcoming. That is why I'm so thankful for all the efforts NASA, ESA, DLF, science museums, and planetariums make to empower young women to achieve their dreams with science and especially space exploration. The initiative of women such as Jan Millsapps, Dr. Suzanna Randall, or Anna Green at the Planetarium Berlin show us that the sky is not the limit. And it brings a whole new dimension to breaking the glass ceiling, a struggle that is still part of many women's reality every day, and a struggle that is a unique one for every woman. With this in mind, again, thank you all so much for joining this event. And I will now hand the mic back over to Marion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these lovely remarks and for taking the time to be here with us today. It's my pleasure to now welcome our moderator, Anna Green, who comes to us from the Berlin Planetarium Foundation. And Anna is a true expert when it comes to women in space science, and we are so happy that she agreed to be with us today. And Anna, I will now hand it directly to you so you can introduce our panel and keep us all going. Thanks so much and enjoy the discussion.
Thanks, Marion. I'm really honored to be here and was honored to be asked to moderate tonight. And I'm very excited now to introduce both our panelists who should engage in a great conversation this evening. So our film director, Jan Millsapps, is a professor emeritus of cinema at the San Francisco State University and is a veteran filmmaker, a pioneering figure in new media movement, an early web innovator, and a versatile and accomplished writer. She has produced films, videos, and interactive media on a variety of topics and has written 2 space-themed novels. Her recent documentary that hopefully you all have been able to see, Madame Mars, Women in the Quest for Worlds Beyond, premiered at the United Nations in Vienna and has been shown at Puerto Rico's famous Southern Observatory and at numerous film festivals. It won first prize for a professional documentary at the 2019 Raw Science Film Festival in Los Angeles. Millsapps has spoken about the need for diversity in space and several Mars Society conventions, the New York United Nations, and the SETI Institute. She's a founding member of the Global Space for Women's Support and Advocacy Network as well. So thank you for joining us, Jan. And then we also have Dr. Suzanna Randall, and she is an astrophysicist who works for the European Southern Observatory in Garching near Munich. She is concerned with the evolution of stars and also works for the ALMA telescope project in Chile. Dr. Randall studied astronomy at the University of London and has a doctorate in astrophysics from the University of Montreal in Canada. She is currently undergoing training to become the first female German astronaut with the support of the private foundation, the Astronautin. Since September 2020, she co-moderates the show Terra X Lesh and Co. on CDF's YouTube channel, presenting different scientific subjects with Harold Lesh. The focus is on showing women in particular that the natural sciences and even the path to space do not have to be exclusively the domain of men. So welcome, Dr. Randall. Thank you both for being here. And I'd like to start, Jan, if you could tell us a little bit just about your inspiration as to why you wanted to make this documentary and how the Madame Mars goes beyond the film as well.
All right, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy all of you are here. I look forward to this discussion and the Q&A. I can tell you about the film generally by saying that I kind of grew up with the space age. I'm old enough to remember Sputnik. I was senior in high school when the first Apollo landed. So I've kind of, it's been a part of my life ever since I can remember almost. But the history of space and space exploration, for me and a lot of others, it really is a history of exclusion. So we all know that, you know, women were not even considered as astronauts for the first few decades, except for the lone exception of Valentina Tereshkova. So I think the film came out of my trying to figure out how to amend the story of space exploration, how to reframe it, and how to bring a larger population into the history of space exploration and project all that into the future. Because when I started making the film, we had just decided, well, everybody was getting real excited about the idea of going to Mars. Now we've kind of taken another, we're going to go back to the moon, but then we're going to go to Mars, but still we're going to go to Mars. So it's the first time in almost a half a century that humans will have attempted to travel beyond low Earth orbit. And so the question I kept asking myself is, how is it going to be any different? We're still kind of mired down in the same space culture. And one of the ways it can be different is that we reframe the story and we tell it and we expand it. And the story of Katherine Johnson and the other women in the Hidden Figures movie was one of the inspiring things that was happening when I started making this movie. There was another book about the women at JPL called The Rise of the Rocket Women. They were also unknown, unnamed. They were called computers, just like the women in Hidden Figures, but they're a part of our space history. And then I discovered Donna Shirley. You saw a brief mention of her in the excerpt from the film we just saw. I had no idea that a woman designed the first rover that went to Mars. Most people don't know that because she's not a part of the larger space history. So it kind of started there, trying to find and tell the stories. and has expanded. The film's done, but there are a lot more stories to be told. So I'm still gathering stories. I'm still telling stories. I have a newsletter that I have feature different women who are doing exciting things. I'm working with the Space for Women, which is a global initiative. We all met at the United Nations. So thank you, UN, for bringing us together, but we're all out there working on collaborative projects, STEM education, STEAM education, jobs, opportunities, advancement, trying to work the space agencies to see if we can actually change the culture. That's my ultimate goal, to change space culture. And I think the ultimate question, which we can talk about later, is how, as we move again into space, toward other worlds and perhaps settle there eventually, how do we represent ourselves to the rest of the universe? Who are we as we take this next big step outward? I'm going to leave it there for now. I hope you have some great questions, and we'll connect on them later.
Great, thank you. The next question I have, and my document just disappeared on me. I apologize for that. There we go. So we touched on this a little bit already, and in the nice opening remarks as well. Only 65 of the more than 560 people who have ever gone into space have been women. And of course, the first was Valentina Tereshkova, as you said, in 1963. And it wasn't until 20 years later, in 1983, that the United States sent Sally Ride, which was a big deal with lots of questions. And I'm not going to go into that history now, but you should definitely look into it if you don't know her story.
How many tampons do you need? That's one of the questions.
Yes. I still can't believe that question was asked. And Europe as a whole, the first time Europe got to send a woman into space was in 1991, and that was Helen Sharman. ESA has only sent 2 women to space. So one was from France, and then more recently in 2014 was Samantha Cristofaietti from Italy, and she's going to be going up again soon. But Germany does not have any female astronauts. I discovered that actually in 1988, there were 2 that trained, and neither of them ever got to fly, which was really sad to find out. So Dr. Randall, I'd like to kind of pick your brain on why you think it's gone this long that Germany has not had a female astronaut. And I know you are trying to rectify that, but how you see that going forward? How do you see us fixing that situation?
So I know it's really, really frustrating, and it's very interesting to hear the American perspective on this, because we at the Astronauten and in Germany in general, we see the US as this kind of shining beacon where there are actually female astronauts, where there are actually, you said about 22% of women in space flights, in the space business. So, I mean, it's much, much worse. In Germany, it's much, much lower. And I don't quite know exactly why it is. I mean, it's true, definitely. I mean, I've worked internationally as well in astrophysics, which is obviously also male dominated as a STEM subject. And I've noticed that in Germany, the fraction of women also in astrophysics is a lot lower than it is, for example, in the UK, or even than it is in Canada, or among other colleagues, or even in Italy and other European countries. I'm not exactly sure why that is. And I think it must be some kind of a cultural stereotype that is just more pronounced here. So one theory, which I actually found quite sad, was there are a lot of female Italian astronomers, actually. So Italy is one of the countries that has a very, very high fraction of female astronomers. And the sad thing was that that is apparently because astronomers are very badly paid in Italy. So it's actually not as attractive a prospect, which is why, I don't know, women have more of a chance maybe of making it there. I don't know. But it's scary that in 2021 now, Germany is still so far behind. And I mean, as you said, we haven't had a single woman in space. And, you know, Germany is a country that has sent 11 men. The 12th man is about to fly. Matthias Maurer is set to fly at the end of this year. And for some reason, the German government or ESA don't seem to want to really proactively do anything about it. So there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of, oh yeah, of course, we need to encourage women. I mean, ESA has now launched a new application round, and they're saying, I mean, they have a big photo with a woman on it saying, oh, please, we encourage women particularly to apply, whatever. But we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of words, and this is also what we find when we talk to the German government. There's a lot of words. It's a lot of, oh, let me have the photo with you. You know, let me take a photo with you. Oh, it's great. Yeah, you can post me on your social media. I mean, all these high-ranking politicians. But when we actually want hard cash, which is actually what we care about. I mean, it's all very nice. People saying, oh, wonderful, we applaud you. It's very nice what you're doing. But at the end of the day, we need cash. We need cash to go to space, right? It's an expensive endeavor. And when it comes to that, then unfortunately, yeah, the money isn't where their mouth is, basically.
Thank you. Yeah. That actually leads into my next question. You touched on it a little bit. ESA has very recently released a call for another class of astronauts. And it's been quite a while since ESA has put out a call for astronauts. And as you mentioned, big deal is we want women to apply, and not just women, but also people who are differently abled. So this is the first time I personally, at least, have really seen that call go out as well, trying to diversify, which is actually a really interesting thought as well, because in space, some of the things that people may not be able to do on Earth due to a disability is something that wouldn't be an issue at all in space. And so that's a new door that could open up a whole bunch of new jobs. And so it's really interesting to see ESA reaching towards that. And again, as you said, let's get more women involved. We'll see what happens in the next couple of years as that decision is made. But from both of you, I'd like to know what your thoughts, I guess, a little further are on that, and what the benefits of that will be. I think all of us together can say we know that it's a benefit to have women involved in spaceflight, but what benefits does the diversity bring to the missions, and how could that especially enhance a Mars mission and make it something that is open to all humans?
Well, it's in addition to inviting people with certain disabilities to apply to be astronauts, they've also have a commitment to re-outfitting their technology, their training facilities, their mission facilities to accommodate people of different abilities. And I that kind of reminds me of the fact that, you know, a year or so ago, we couldn't send 2 women on a spacewalk because they didn't pack enough spacesuits to fit women. So, and there's also a story about Valentina Tereshkova. There was a foot pedal she was supposed to touch to do a certain thing when she was on her flight in 1963. Her legs couldn't reach the floor of the space capsule to push the button because they hadn't thought of designing it for a shorter person. So, you know, I think when you start thinking about how to diversify space, it's not just the people you send, it's the facilities, it's the equipment, it's the space capsules and everything. And so I think it is a good step forward that ENUSA has done that. I think we have a lot of, you know, small steps that we're taking in the next week or so. If the Mars helicopter flies successfully, look for the name Mimi Aung, A-U-N-G. She designed the Mars helicopter. A lot of people don't know this, and I hope she will be a part of the story. I hope she'll be all over the news. She's great. She's fantastic. But keep in mind, you know, we still don't even have a non-gender specific thing to call what we're doing. People still call it manned flights. They don't call it human flights. They try to call it crewed flights. That sounds ridiculous. And the fact that we have never, ever had an all-female crew in space, whereas an all-male crew is the norm, you know, that's okay. But even asking people to imagine sending an all-female crew, not there. And also, there have been no female first in space. There are the first female to do so-and-so, but no person in space has been to do the first thing first has been a woman. So we're making small steps, but I think the overall space culture still has a really long ways to go.
Yeah, and just to add to that, of course, it's really important to have female bodies, just reducing women to their bodies for once in space, because a lot of the experiments that are done, especially on the ISS, on the International Space Station, are of course, paving the way for future missions to Mars, for example, because basically the prolonged effects of microgravity on the human body is being explored in detail on the International Space Station. And so far, obviously, most of these bodies have been male bodies, and it's not clear that the female body reacts the same way. So we really have a dearth of information on what microgravity does to the female body, and it's important for future missions, especially for long duration missions, but it's also important for scientific research here on Earth. And this is, I always like to give the crash test dummy example, right? It's the data gap issue. It's the fact that crash test dummies are modeled on the male body, and just as a result of that, women have a much higher chance of becoming severely injured or even dying in a car crash, just because the crash test dummies and all the airbags and everything, the belts and so on, are just designed for a typical male body and not a typical female body. And I think that is absolutely, it's critical that we have 50% women at least. And I agree, we need at least one all-female space mission first to just bring equality back. But we need 50% of all astronauts to be female for that reason. And the other really important thing is we've talked a lot about fantastic women in the space industry. And unfortunately, I think this is very unfair, but unfortunately, it's often the astronauts that receive the attention, right? Because they are kind of the faces. They're the ones to actually go up there. They're the ones that kids look at and dream of becoming. So I think just for the next generation, it's really, really important that we have these faces, this very, very visible people that are, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, all the engineers and everyone making it all possible, they are just as important, but they're just not as visible. And I think it's absolutely critical that we have women in these positions that are visible to inspire the next generation.
That's a really, sorry.
I'm sorry. In my research, I discovered these two women who are research scientists, and they discovered in female mice, radiation doesn't affect them, whereas it does affect male mice. And we all know radiation exposure is a huge problem when we get farther out from Earth's atmosphere. And so these women have discovered that there's something in the female gene may protect them from radiation in space. If I had money, I would be giving it all to them. Because it almost puts women in first place. You know, if you're going to send people safely into space, send the ones that don't get killed by radiation.
Yeah, that's the first I'm gonna go read about this now once we're done today, because that's really interesting. I'd like to know more about that. Learn something new every day. That's the best part about being a lifelong learner. So both of you have touched not only on the astronauts, which is of course what we focus on mostly, as you said, Dr. Randall, but also the people behind the astronauts, the people who make everything happen, the engineers and everyone in mission control. And as a kid, you know, I played astronaut, but I actually really was fascinated with the mission control side of things and had no problem with the thought of my feet staying on the ground and being in the mission control room. And I'm wondering what dreams both of you had. Did you dream of being an astronaut? Did you dream of working in mission control, or doing both? Or were your dreams of space just this whole futuristic 1950s style space station? What kind of thoughts did you have as a child about going to space, and how did those shape where you are today?
I can say that when I came along, which was before Suzanna came along, I'm sure many years before, those doors were not open. We didn't have STEM education. I remember wanting to sign up for an advanced math course in high school, and the guidance counselor told me I didn't have the right temperament for it. I had the grades, but I didn't have the right temperament. So I was actively discouraged from preparing myself for anything like a career in STEM. So I think I probably made lemonade out of my lemons by just studying the arts. I was sent to take art classes instead, but I learned how to be a really good artist and to tell stories, and then that turned into filmmaking. And so now I really, you know, the joke's on them. I feel like I really am a part of the space effort, and my part really has to do with communicating, illuminating, you know, telling the stories that haven't been told.
And I think that's a really critical part, because I see that a lot in science. Actually, there are brilliant scientists out there that can't communicate what they've achieved, and they go unseen. So I think communication of what is achieved is actually a huge, huge part of it. So, I mean, for me, I think I did always want to become an astronaut. It was astronaut or maybe pirate. I played with the idea of becoming a pirate when I was a little girl, just because I thought sailing the seas on these ships would be great, and just discovering new lands or new worlds in a spaceship. So for me, it was always about discovering new things and about going somewhere where not many people had been before. I think that always fascinated me, but it was just generally the idea of space as well. So I grew up with Sally Ride. She was actually my personal role model, because I don't know, she just seemed really nice. And for me, she was probably the person that made me believe that I could become an astronaut potentially, that it was even an option. So for me, she was really, really important as a role model. But then, I mean, I think for me, it wasn't as extreme as for Jan, because I grew up, I guess, 10 or 20 years later. So I wasn't actively discouraged from doing maths or physics, but actually I hated maths and physics. So I was the other extreme. My parents are both linguists. So I was always encouraged. I was always told, oh, you're very good at languages. I was encouraged to do linguistic things. I was encouraged to do music. I was also good at music and arts. And that was kind of what I was always told I was good at. And at school, I was just like, maths, physics, oh, that's boring. That's for the boys. And it wasn't for the attractive boys either. It was for the boring boys that I didn't want to have anything to do with. So it was just not really made to appear very attractive to me. And for me, what saved it really was that relatively late, when I was about 16, I had a really good teacher, a really good physics teacher, who just, for the first time in my life, made me realize that actually physics explains everything. It explains the entire world around us and everything that happens. And for me, that was one of these aha moments. I was like, okay, wow, great. So maybe it's not so boring, and for these nerds after all, maybe it's actually something that can be applied to our life, to every day, to everything. And then, since I had always been fascinated by space, I kind of decided to combine this newfound appreciation of physics with my fascination for space, and become an astrophysicist and study that. But it was, it was also not something that I was actively encouraged to do.
I love that both of you gave answers where you talk about, I hate to use the term, but being well-rounded, basically, and taking time to study different interests, whether you were encouraged to do so or not. And I think that's important too. If you have an interest in math and physics, or you have an interest in music, that doesn't mean you can't do the other one. It's definitely something you can do. And a lot of times things like that go hand in hand. Music and science go great together. So if anybody out there is thinking about that path, you can do a double degree. If anything, it takes you an extra year in school, but maybe an extra 2, but it's worth it if that's what your passion is.
But also these days, you know, any career, any profession can connect to the space industry. It doesn't have to be the traditional STEM subjects. We have, you know, when I've interviewed women who do, you know, they invent the astronaut food. They're nutritionists. You know, there's a woman that sews the parachutes that the spacecraft need to, you know, even the very traditional considered female jobs like cooking and sewing. There are career paths at NASA right now. So anything that you want to do, if it's not science or tech related, see if you can figure out how that fits in, because it probably does.
Definitely, very much so. Jan, in particular, I kind of want to go back to what you mentioned about your experience and being discouraged, unfortunately, from taking an advanced math course. In the 1960s, when girls would write letters to NASA inquiring about becoming astronauts themselves, NASA would send them a thanks, but no thanks. And there are, you know, the stories about the flats, the Mercury 13, the women who trained and did the exact same training that the Mercury 7 men did, and in a lot of cases scored better than them on the different tests, and were never allowed to fly. And we're kind of led on to think that they might get a mission and then did. And so do you think that despite a lack of encouragement, that the girls still had something to be hopeful for their future, or were their dreams unrealistic moving forward? And kind of building off of that, what would you say to a girl now who was discouraged from achieving their dreams to work in STEM by an adult? I unfortunately, it's 2021. I wish I could say I don't hear that anymore, but the gap seems to build in middle school where math and science is not made as attractive to girls. I've heard people tell, it broke my heart. I heard a grandmother tell her granddaughter, no, you don't want a telescope, that's for boys. We're gonna go over here, look at the pink stuff. Literally heard those words. And for girls in those positions, the ones who want the telescopes and they're being told they can't have them, what would you say to them to encourage them?
I'm just remembering the women that I interviewed for the film, and it seems to be a prime distinction among women who excel in science and technology careers back then and still now. They had some supports from somewhere. Either their parents, one of their parents, or both of their parents were scientists or engineers or something and encouraged them and maybe got them the telescope that they wanted, or they had a teacher or some other kind of mentor. There seems to be a direct connection between a child getting the encouragement she needs and her having enough determination to keep going in a culture that actually tells her she shouldn't or she couldn't or she might have better do something else. So I think, you know, we have girls that give up. Of course we do. We have girls that persevere. But I think the important distinction is that we have to find the girls where they are and encourage them. And that can be, we can do that in a lot of ways. I think this presentation right here is one of the ways.
Yeah, I always hear, if you don't see it, you don't know you can be it. So it's important to have someone who looks like you that you can aspire to be as well. So I liked too, Jan, that you said that, you know, other women have opened doors. We've heard that a couple times this evening. And I've heard that through the years too. You know, other women opened the doors so that I could be here today. And so that's something to keep in mind too, is moving forward, you're opening doors for the next woman behind you, the next generation behind you. I think I would be amiss if I didn't ask the next question, because I'm sure that plenty of people are wondering. And Dr. Randall, if you wanted to add on to that before you answer the next question, that's totally fine. But I do want to ask you how you are currently training to pursue your dream of being becoming the first German female astronaut. And do you plan to try for this ESA class as well, or are you sticking with the private foundation moving forward, and how are you training with them?
Okay, so to start on the whole role model thing, I have to agree, role models are super, super important. And I think it's really important to start very young. So I think really the foundations for what you think you might find interesting laid very, very early on, when kids are maybe as little as 4 or 5 or 6, when they start interacting in play school, in primary school with other kids. And just one example I have that just struck me, I mean, it's got nothing to do with astronauts, but I have a little nephew and he was probably 4 or 5 at the time. And he they had like a Ponyhof Playmobil thing. And he really wanted like a pony because, you know, he liked ponies. And then he was like, oh, but it's pink, it's only for girls. Oh, I can't have it. And he was really, really sad. And then I said, oh no, look, there is a little Playmobil, you know, the little Playmobil figures. There is also a boy. There's not just a girl. There's also a boy on the picture. And he was like, okay. Oh, there's also a boy. Oh, okay. Then I can have my pony. So I think that just illustrated to me how important it is not just to have real life role models, but also to have female characters or male characters in, you know, non-traditional roles, let's say, in kids' books, in kids' play stuffs and so on, because they're just introduced to that concept that it's completely normal for a boy to also want to have a pony, for example, or a girl to also want to be an astronaut. And I think that's super important. Okay, so coming to the training. I'm indeed training with a private initiative, the Astronautin, which was initiated because basically Claudia Kessler, who's an aerospace engineer, couldn't believe that it was, I think it was 2016 when she initiated this contest. She couldn't believe that there hadn't been a female German astronaut so far. And basically when she asked around why that wasn't the case, the reply she got was, oh, but there aren't any qualified women out there. And this was like 2016. This was not, you know, in the 1950s. So this was the answer she got. And then she said, oh no, you know what? I'm going to do my own program. I'm going to try and find well-educated women in the STEM subjects, of course. So this is the traditional astronaut domain. These were all doctors, engineers, scientists, and so on. I'm going to find these people and I'm going to just launch my own campaign to find the first German female astronaut. And indeed, about over 400 women applied. And I had the privilege of meeting not all of them, but many of them. And I mean, they were amazing. I mean, really, I mean, everything, as I said, from doctors, engineers, scientists of the different kinds and whatever. And so that was already, I think, an achievement of this project, just to show the world in a way. And we were also, of course, picked up by the media to show the world that even in Germany, yes, there are qualified women in the STEM subjects that have this dream of becoming an astronaut and reaching for the stars. So then she basically convinced the German Aerospace Agency, DLR, to conduct the selection process in exactly the same way as the ESA selection process is conducted. And eventually they then selected 2 trainees at the end of a year-long process, basically. And I mean, that was also interesting in terms of the whole females and the way they're regarded in society aspect, because there were 6 of us who were finalists. And in this final round, we were kind of presented to the media as astronaut candidate finalists and whatever. And I mean, a lot of the coverage we got was very encouraging and very nice. And, oh, this is a great idea. And yes, women forward. But we also had things like, oh, Germany's next top astronaut. So those of you that live in Germany will understand the reference. And it was all about, oh, they're going to pick the prettiest one and whatever. So that was a bit, okay, fine, great. So that's why I always want to make it very clear that the criteria applied were exactly the same as for the ESA selection, where they also select men, right? They didn't pick the astronaut with the nicest hair. So anyway, in the end, 2 of us were selected, my colleague Insatila Eich, who's a meteorologist, and myself. And we've now, for the last 2.5 years, been doing astronaut training part-time. So because we're a private initiative, we don't have the funding to live off being an astronaut trainee. So we both have our normal jobs, which basically pay for the roofs over our heads. And then we're doing the training part-time. And what we've been doing is a variety of things. I mean, there's a lot of theory, of course, involved, which luckily during the pandemic, we've been able to do via Zoom, via online platforms. But of course, we also had physical training. We went diving. We went up, did parabolic flights to get to know weightlessness. We went in a centrifuge to experience a rocket launch and the effects it has on our bodies. What else we did? We learned to fly a plane, which was also a lot of fun. We went diving. So we did all kinds of training. And in the end, we finished our basic training now in November of last year. So we're kind of not ready to go yet. There are 2 parts. There's the basic training, and then there's a mission-specific training. But we're kind of as far as we can go right now because we've completed the basic training and we really need a mission to be able to start the mission-specific training. And our big challenge right now is the funding for that, because we are a private initiative. So we were in very close contact with the politicians of Germany and also Bavaria and other Länder. But well, as I said, a lot of them were very, very happy to support us with words and photos. But when it came to the actual money and actual financial assistance, it was like, oh yeah, great project. Oh, but I don't have money. Ask him. Oh, ask him. Ask her. And we were kind of pushed around a little bit. And of course, now with the pandemic, priorities have shifted again. So yeah, that's kind of our situation right now.
We're getting close to the Q&A, so I have a bunch of questions I really want to ask both of you. But I'm going to ask just one last one, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A and let our audience ask some questions. We've touched already a little bit on this, but I'd like to know what, I guess, your philosophy is behind engaging girls and young women and boys in emphasizing that women belong in space too. And making sure that boys see this as a normal thing, that women are in space. And if there's anything specific in your life that has helped you with that, or anything else specific that you found to be kind of like a breakthrough moment in that process.
Well, I don't, it's not only women that are underrepresented, a lot of ethnic minorities, people in developing nations. I mean, there are a lot of people that are excluded from any kind of participation in space exploration. So my first thing would be to say we're a bigger underserved group than just women, and we should be working to help each other. That's one thing. I think the other thing is, I really think STEM education needs kind of an overhaul because I think Suzanna said, she wasn't really attracted to those subjects. I think, there is a way to engage girls with science and technology. I just think traditional education hasn't quite found how to do that. And then I would say, as far as the future is concerned, we're heading off into deep space again. The thing that's different this time is that we are planning to establish permanent residencies on the moon and eventually on Mars. And so we're moving toward thinking about space not just as an adventure, but as a lifestyle, as a place to live, as a place to work. And I think, framing it that way with people to really help everyone understand that you don't just colonize Mars with men, with white men. You find a way to whatever your version is of our current culture and how we want to represent ourselves. It's got to be a larger group than the very specialized group that has gone into deep space before.
Yes, so I definitely agree that, but I find it a bit sad that only now is society realizing how important it is to have women, because the adventurers, the explorers, the people that get there first, those are always the men. And then they're like, oh yeah, fine. And then we'll bring along the women because someone has to have the kids, right? Or someone has to, okay, I'm being provocative. Someone has to keep the Mars colony clean, or, do the cooking or something. And I think that is a problem because women, and this is of course a generalization. I mean, there are many women that are pioneering, but as a kind of generalization, as a rule, also when I speak to kids, especially, or young people, it's often the women that are like, oh, yeah, but it's risky. Oh, I don't know. And that is still for me something that I'm not sure whether it has to do with testosterone. I'm sure a lot of it does, that men are just more, oh, whatever, I don't care about the risk, I'm just going to do it. But I think there's a big societal component there as well, that girls are often just taught to let men go first, maybe to do the exploration. And then, when it's safe to do so, then they can also come along and to not be the kind of pioneers and the ones pushing. And I really think that's a shame, because if women had been pioneers for the last few hundred years, maybe some things would have gone differently and maybe also better.
Thank you. So our first question comes from Sarah Wagner, and she would like to know, in terms of popular media representation, movies, TV shows, etc., what are your favorite female role models when it comes to space exploration?
I'm trying to come up with one. Wow. You know, everybody always talks about Ripley, the Sigourney Weaver character in Alien, but she, you know, she's a caricature. She's not. She's too much. There was a limited series with Hilary Swank in it recently. What was it called? Away. Yeah, that I think got a little more into like developing a fully dimensional female character. I think she, like other like male astronauts, she spent way too much time chasing the right stuff, but she also had the dimension that a lot of female characters in space TV and movies do not. I'll leave it there, except just to say I'm developing a TV series that will actually do that. So I hope you guys get to see it someday.
Yeah, that would be good. I also had to think for a while. And actually, one of my favorite characters as a kid, which is when I think I was most, susceptible and these characters were most important to me, was, so she didn't live for very long, unfortunately. It was Tasha Yar in Star Trek, The Next Generation. So I don't know, because she was really tough. She was tough and she was adventurous and she wanted to go out there, and she wasn't just this caring psychologist. There was another character, Deanna Troy, I think, but she was more the stereotypical woman who was very caring and always, but Tasha, she was like really fierce and she was going down to the planet, and she was really going for it. So I really liked her, but unfortunately she got killed off very quickly. So I don't know whether there's any correlation between her being a tough woman and being killed off, but she unfortunately didn't last very long. But I think in more recent series, there has at least been an effort to establish some kind of a female presence also in the space movies.
Yeah, I had to think about that too, which makes me sad that I had to think that much about it. But yeah, I think one of the first women I remember from a show was Dr. Beverly Crusher from Star Trek Next Generation. And I always loved episodes that were heavy with Dr. Crusher in the plot. So moving on to our next question. This one comes from Julia, and she would like to know, well, she says, first of all, she feels very honored to take part in this discussion. As a 19-year-old book blogger and author of children's books, my main question is, how can we awaken girls' and women's interest in space exploration through literature? In my opinion, books are one of the strongest sources we have when trying to empower not only women, but also certain communities. I'm thinking of book clubs discussing women's space history, campaigns, cooperations with libraries, bookshops, etc. How do you assess the situation? Do you think that expanding the reader's world could make a great contribution to more diversity in space too? And she sends her greetings from Frankfurt.
I think she should just go and do all of those things, because it sounds like she knows exactly what to do. Yeah, all of, discussing women's space history. I will mention a friend of mine, her name's Alessandro. She has a series of books called Girls in Space. The original language is Portuguese, but I think it's being translated into several other languages by now. So examples like that, find women who are writing books about girls in technology, girls in space, girls in science, and follow those.
Yeah, so I think it's very, very important, to have women just represented in all media, especially for kids. So actually, Inza and me, we wrote a kids book on exactly that, on our way into space. It's so far it's only in German, and it's for kids just learning how to read. So it's not a particularly long or literaristic novel or anything, but the aim was exactly that. We have a book about astronauts for kids learning to read where there's 2 women on the cover, and that was really, really important to us.
For those of us learning German, that also might be a good way to practice our reading.
It's a little basic, but yeah, depending on the level of German, yeah.
So our next question comes from Didymus. Hi, everyone. My question is to Jan. As a storyteller and filmmaker, how much knowledge or research do you need? What would you tell young writers who are scared that they might not understand astrophysics in order to tell stories about space?
I don't understand astrophysics and I tell stories about space. You pick it up along the way. I mean, I think being afraid is not the way to go. Just, you know, if you have an idea, start working the idea, and, you know, you can sit and Google the things that you need to know. It's really, you know, it's cliche to say it's not rocket science, but the information is out there. And the other thing I would say is, if you're going to tell stories, you know, you concentrate on the people and their goals and what they want and their conflicts, and you know, the science and technology can kind of provide the context or the backdrop, but you don't really have to be a specialist in any of this stuff. Although I have learned quite a bit about Mars in the past few years.
So Marianne, or it might also possibly be Mariana. So I apologize if I said one of those wrong. I think her question is directed towards Dr. Randall. How will the private funding work? If ESA doesn't select you, how can you, or can you buy your way onto a mission? How much money do you need? How much have you been able to collect? Are major companies like Siemens, Bosch, BASF, VW, BMW, Bayer funding you?
Yeah, as I said, so far, all of our funding for the training has come either by in-kind contributions. So we do have a cooperation with Airbus, for example, and some other companies, the DLR, for example, the German Aerospace Agency. But most of the training we've done so far has been on a very low budget and funded by ourselves, by things like giving presentations, keynote presentations, by winning prizes in women's societies and things like that. So we've really so far paid for the majority of our training so far. The mission itself, it's clear we're not going to be able to fund it this way because we need about $50 million US. So that's a sum of money that you can't just, you know, win a little prize or ask some people for donations. That's quite obvious. So our initial aim was, and we tried this a lot, to get sponsoring from, as you say, from major companies, especially, of course, German companies, because those are going to be the ones that are going to be interested in having the first German woman in space, of course. But it was a lot harder than we imagined, because the sums of money involved are just so big. So it's been kind of difficult. So then we basically concentrated on the German government, because we thought, okay, the German government, it will be in their interest also to set the sign to send a German woman into space. And again, so far, there've been a lot of nice words, but no real money yet. So at the moment, we're actually at a bit of an impasse. So we need the funding, and we're kind of at a point where we have to see whether we can continue or not. Another idea is to work together with ESA. So we've proposed a partnership with ESA where we would fly as commercial astronauts, so not in this regular selection process, but as commercial astronauts. And they said, yeah, sure, as long as you bring your own money. So we're like, okay, great. So let's see where we go there, but we're still trying to go down that path and see where it takes us. So yeah, that's basically the situation. We're trying to get the funding, but it's getting $50 million is tough.
Yeah, that's not exactly pocket change. So Yuli has another question, and I actually would like to know the answer to this as well. Is there any possibility that Madame Mars would become a book? I'm deeply inspired by the brave stories of so many women, their accomplishments, missions, and future goals. I think they need to be captured on paper too.
Well, fortunately for all of you, it already is a book, or it has, yeah, actually the film came from a book I wrote, which is not at all the same, not the same outlook, but I wrote a novel called Venus on Mars. And like the film, it was inspired by finding out about this woman that she was an astronomer before anybody let women be astronomers. She lived in the Victorian era, so late 1800s, early 1900s. Her name was Rexy Louise Leonard. She worked at Lowell Observatory as a secretary, but she was kind of a secretary with benefits to Percival Lowell, who ran the observatory. So she got to go under the dome and look through the big telescope, and she kept track of her observations. She published articles. And so the fact that I found this woman just happenstance, I wanted to kind of develop a whole story about her. And as part of the novel, I also then invented another fictional character, a character who's totally fictional, but who worked at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, during the late 60s, 1970s, as we were sending the first space probes to Mars. So she has workplace issues that have to do with sexism, which was very prevalent during that time. So I was able to kind of tell a story on top of a story about another woman's experiences trying to explore Mars and running into challenges. What I can say about what I'm doing to like build out from the documentary is that I am doing profiles on women, and I publish these in a newsletter. I work with an international group called Space for Women, and we do events. And we're trying to establish a new international holiday called VS Day, and it stands for Valentina and Sally. Their trips were like almost days apart, 20 years apart, but days apart in June. So in June, we're planning to do a big event to celebrate Valentina Tereshkova and Sally Ride and other female space pioneers. So we'll be presenting stories about women's accomplishments in space. And this is something we want to do on a regular basis. So I think what I'm doing now is kind of building out a lot of transmedia elements that are kind of come from the film but are not a part of the film. So so there's the book in the past. There's all the stuff I'm doing now, and there's probably another film in the future.
So we have an anonymous attendee who would like to know, what do you think about how space travel will change once it involves more women? Oh, and there's a continuation too, so I'll add that in there. And how can major space programs benefit from more women in the STEM field or in space in general?
Well, I mean, one thing I already talked about, and that's the medical benefits, basically, of having a female body in space. As I said, I think that's really, really important. But quite apart from that, I mean, studies continue to show that the more diverse a team is, the better, basically, the better the results they get. And I can say that also from personal experience. I mean, even my male colleagues, it's not a bad thing for men to have more women in the team, right? I mean, even my male colleagues, I now work in a team where we're, I think, about 45% women, which is quite unusual in astrophysics. And all the men I work with say it's the best team they've ever worked in, because it's just more dynamic. It's less about, the alpha males trying to profile themselves. And it's more about, it's more diverse. It's more about communication. So I think, that is one major factor. You just need diverse teams. And that's also minorities, people from different backgrounds, not just women. You need that. And that way, I think you're going to make space missions more creative and more of a success. And the other thing is that, of course, you need the best people. And if you're excluding, as NASA did at the outset, if you exclude 50% of the population just by default, you're probably not getting the best people. So it's important to make sure that talents, whether they're male or female, are nurtured and can really live up to their potential.
I think long term, I keep talking about space culture. I think the more diverse the groups are that we send into space, that's going to then make the change. We're going to then evolve space culture into something that's not all about alpha males. I mean, and I'll add to that, not just including the women on the missions, but having women in leadership positions. I think it's not enough just to have female astronauts alongside the male astronauts. I think we need to evolve our space culture so that women are just as likely to be mission leaders as men.
100% agree. Marianne would also like to know, what specific projects or experiments would you and or Insa Tele Eich like to conduct in space?
Yeah, so our program isn't finalized, to put it that way. So we're still basically hoping for biotech companies, for example, for pharmaceutical companies that want to work with us and can also, I mentioned the financial aspect, sponsor us in that sense. We have 2 projects right now that are a bit more advanced. One is with the DLR, so with the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Luft- und Raumfahrt, the German Aerospace Agency, and that is about looking at eyesight and how it deteriorates or not in space. So apparently, and this is very interesting, for men, about 30% of men experience, well, not a loss, but a degradation of their eyesight in space. So basically their eyesight gets worse. And this phenomenon hasn't been observed for women. And so no one knows why this should be the case, because the eyes are generally something that you think, well, male eyes, female eyes, where's the difference, right? But there is a difference, and that's one experiment we want to. So we want to basically measure our eyes and determine exactly what our eyes are doing in microgravity compared to before and after. And the other experiment that we're kind of still in the discussion and planning phase here with a female professor in Munich as well, is on fertility and the female hormone cycle in space, and whether, we don't even know whether there is an effect on the cycle in microgravity, for example, which would of course then for Mars missions, since that's what we're talking about here, be of great interest if we're really talking about eventually colonizing a planet, for example.
So Valerie would like to know what your opinions are on the STEAM initiative, which promotes creative problem solving and ethics, but effectively removes the STEM distinction and includes basically all academic fields now.
Well, I actually am one of the ones who likes to break down the boundaries and the exclusiveness of the STEM distinctions, because I think, you know, you need to be creative to be scientific, and you need some kind of scientific discipline and information to be creative. So I don't really, I think dividing it up into STEM and non-STEM is kind of a false distinction to begin with. I like the fact that we've now incorporated the arts. We can call it STEAM. I think a lot of other disciplines belong in this together as well, you know, like the social sciences, all of the arts and humanities, certainly business practices, economics, because we're going to deal with all of that when we go to Mars. We actually have to know everything we know on Earth, and that means all the disciplines and all the jobs and all the careers that we have on Earth. We're going to need those eventually as we settle on other worlds. So yeah, let's not be exclusive about STEM.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And especially, so one thing that always bugs me a bit is if it says somewhere, oh, it's scientifically proven, it's scientifically this, it's scientifically that, because it elevates scientists to something almost godlike in a lot of ways. And what I would like is, and that's what I'm also trying with the science outreach I do, it's not for us all to be research scientists that have to be extremely specialized, because I mean, it's just, you're talking about extremely complex subjects, so you have to be very, very specialized. But I would like for everybody, women and men, to have some kind of a basic scientific way of thinking and grasping things. And I think it has to be more inclusive. I mean, science or STEM doesn't have to be something that's out there just for some people that are then, you know, thought of as very intelligent or very male or very whatever. But it should be a part of everybody's life. I mean, the same way a basic artistic education should be, I think. I mean, as I said, I was involved in music when I was little. I still play the piano. I still sing in a choir. And I think what we need is well-rounded people, not just you know, scientists that are up there somewhere that have no connection to the real world.
Yeah, I would add to, I have a K through 12 teaching license from the United States. And one of the big things that we always focused on was not everybody learns the same way. And so, for example, I know for me, it was helpful if I could hear things in a rhythm or somehow make it more musically connected. And then in the same pass, if I was in English class, sometimes there would be some kind of scientific connection that would help me with what I was doing in English. So even just from my own personal experience, yeah, I think, as Jan said, we need to break down the borders between the subjects because they all commingle quite nicely. So an anonymous attendee would like to know, how are you handling the frustration in terms of disadvantages for women or other minorities? By the way, I'm 17, female, and looking forward to becoming a physicist.
Oh, wow. I think the best way is with a sense of humor, because it's often the only thing you can do. So actually, I mean, I personally, in my professional life, I've been exposed to very, very little sexism, because at least in the professional world, in science, people tend to be very, very aware of the issues, at least in my environment. When I didn't really realize there was a problem until I started with the Astronautin, when I really started interacting as a scientist, as an astronaut candidate with the general public. And that's when I was hit by, oh, wow, okay, there are people that think like that. And I'm seeing it now. I'm doing this Terra X Lesson core thing. So I'm basically presenting a science format on YouTube. And I mean, some of the comments I get there, I mean, a lot of them are very positive, right? So the problem is that if you look at the comments, you tend to just focus on the negative 5%. And some of them are like, oh my God, there's a woman explaining this. And I'm like, really? Are you kidding me? It's 2021. Or there are people that call me Haraldine Lesch or say, oh, Harald, you've become very beautiful and your hair's grown a lot or something. And I'm just like, whoa. But I found that in the end, I did try discussing with these people on social media, in the comments and so on at the beginning. And I just found it was too frustrating. So really for me, the thing is to kind of laugh at those comments and push them aside and focus more on the positive comments, and continue to do my thing and do my thing the way I believe it should be done as well.
I think you look for workarounds. Like no doesn't have to mean no. No just means I've got to find another way to do what I want to do. I think you look for support wherever you find it, and that may be in your peer group, that may be a mentor, maybe an older sibling or a parent or other relative. I think finding like-minded people, reaching out to like-minded people, you can find anybody online. So don't be afraid, you know, if there's someone you read about who does a job that you admire in the space industry, don't be afraid to Google them and find out what you can. And you can find their email, send them an email. And I've been like really pleasantly surprised by how receptive most of the people that I've approached, you know, about an interview or, you know, just to find out more, have been very open and accommodating. So I would say those strategies are worth pursuing.
Had to do it once, was muted. I would definitely agree, both on mentors and having a group of peers that you can support and they can support you as well. I was very fortunate to have two mentors as I was moving through in the planetarium world, and some of my colleagues are now my best friends. We talk literally every day, and we work on planetariums around the world, and we support each other, and it's somewhere we can go to ask questions, or if we're frustrated, or just to share good news and what the best part of our day was. And so I definitely second the supportive people and mentors as well. And unfortunately, there's a bunch more questions, and we are almost out of time. So this is going to be the last question before I have to turn it back over to Marion. And I'm going to see if I can combine some of them together cohesively. So do you get any support from German lawyers in connecting with the government, asking as a law student? And that was Julie. And she also wants to know, in non-corona times, is there any possibility to meet you all at certain events? And then our anonymous attendee would also like to know, do you think that co-working with young authors, artists, etc., will help to spread the message of women in space?
Okay, so I'll take the first one. No, we haven't really been in touch with any lawyers. It's actually maybe a good idea. It's not something we had thought of really. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, please message me. That would be yeah, very interesting. And then I'll hand over to Jan for I think the last part is probably more her subject.
That was a lot of questions. Okay, I think somebody asked about something about telling a story or telling a realistic story. I'm looking at the questions. I don't remember the questions.
Do you think that co-working with young authors, artists, et cetera, will help spread the message of women in space?
Yes, of course. I mean, I actually think, we have to get over the idea that there is one story. There are multiple stories, and everybody has a voice, and everybody has a chance to tell the story that they want to tell. It can all be based on the same events or the same facts or the same history or the same future, but everybody has a slightly different way of thinking about it, way of expressing it. So I would say the more stories, the better. And then it's also just so easy these days to share your stories. You can do your own little Facebook videos, live videos. You can blog. You can just get your stuff out there so much better than even 10, 15 years ago. So there's really no good reason, if you feel a bent toward telling these stories, doing it and distributing it. Oh, and about meeting us in person. Gosh, I wish I could be there. My son lives in Berlin. When I got this invitation, I thought, great, I get to visit Berlin. But that was not to be. No, hopefully all of this hopefully all of this will improve maybe in another year. And I do go to a lot of space events. So hopefully if I'm around and you're around, we will meet in person.
Yeah, so it's the same for us with Astronautin. So we do, or we used to, before Corona, go to a lot of events and give talks and so on. But in a way, it's actually easier now because we do online talks. So you don't have to be physically in the same place. So in a way, it's easier to connect right now as well.
I'll just put in a plug for your local size Stuttgart Planetarium. Go visit them definitely when they're allowed to reopen. And if you're in Berlin, we have 3 planetariums and 2 observatories, so feel free to visit us at any one of those as well.
And my Space for Women group, we've done things the last few years for World Space Week. It happens in October, and all of you can be involved. Anybody anywhere in the world can participate in World Space Week. You don't have to plan a big deal. We usually plan a panel of some kind, but go to World Space Week. That's also one way to keep up with Space for Women, because they're one of our partners. We work with World Space Week. And the theme for 2021, October, is Women in Space. So perfect. All of us should be involved.
All right. Is that it? Are you handing it back to me? I don't see any complaints. So thank you all so much for this insightful conversation, for taking the time to come and talk to us and our audience today, and for celebrating Women's History Month with us. We are very thankful to especially the panel and of course Anna for moderating it, but also we would like to thank again our cooperation partners for putting this event together, and also all of you at home for always tuning in and for contributing to the transatlantic dialogue. We are very grateful that you're here, and thank you for your questions and your support. So that's it for today. If you want to join us again for our next conversation, we are hosting an event on startup culture this Thursday, the 25th at 7 p.m. And as always, you can find all the important information, how to join us on our website. And so we would be delighted to see you then, and wish you all a very good night. And thanks again. Bye.